the fact that my culture is very important to me. It's always something that's in the back of my mind. Like I'm always looking for more like Latino representation.
As a professional, I don't get to practice Spanish a whole lot, especially within the Atlassian ecosystem. Like everybody speaks English.
That understanding of cultural differences is extremely obviously important to teamwork.
Hey
Mhm.
everyone, welcome back to the Summer of Atlassian. Today I have Katherine Rocha from Release Team. Release Team? We rolling the R
Yeah,
for everything?
you're the first person to pronounce my name correctly in a professional
Really? Because
setting.
I thought I
So,
messed it up just right
yeah.
now.
You know what?
I thought I messed it up just right now.
No, you nailed it. Good job.
Awesome. So where are you from then, Katherine? Where is your last name from?
Mexico. I'm
Mexico.
Mexican.
Okay.
Yes.
Which part? I'm Mexican as well.
Are you really?
No, well, my parents are
Yes.
Zacatecas.
Oh, okay. My family's from Mexico City.
Okay. I'm not allowed to talk
Yes.
to you.
I know, but like it's okay. I feel like once you're outside of Mexico, it doesn't matter. Like everyone can come together and be like proud to be
After,
Mexican.
yeah. We
Yeah.
my I guess in our family we have a very firm like we're not allowed to go to Mexico City. We want to come back alive.
I know. I feel like it kind of gets a bad rap. I mean, it's a huge city. I think it's like one of the top five
It's a
biggest
sinking
cities in
city,
the
you know?
world. Yeah, yeah, but it's great. There's, as much as there is bad things, there's also very amazing things about
I
Mexico City. So,
I would love to go to Mexico City one day. A couple of my closest friends have been from Mexico City. I live in Southern California, so we have a lot of the Mexican
oh,
culture. Like
perfect.
it's part
Yes.
of our DNA. Like I always tell my wife, I'm like, you can take the Mexican out of Mexico, but you can't take the Mexico out of the Mexican. Because like East LA, like if you were
Yeah.
to go to East LA, like you're right back in the streets of Mexico.
Yeah. No, I love that. I feel like there's so many parts, even in the United States, that still have really kept that Mexican identity because they used to be part of Mexico, obviously. Um, I live in Houston, Texas now, and that's one of the reasons I moved here is because I wanted a really good mix of Mexican culture and American culture. So I totally get what you're saying.
It's interesting you say that because I used to live in San Diego, which is like 10 minutes from the border,
Yeah, the border.
right?
Mhm.
And I feel like LA has a much richer LA and Orange County has a much richer like Hispanic, but it's specifically of Mexican vibe when
Yeah.
you compare to San Diego. Like I feel like San Diego has cities and towns that are like rooted on like Mexican culture, but
Mhm.
like I wouldn't eat the Mexican food in San Diego. Like I never enjoyed it.
Bummer. Yeah, no. Yeah,
But
definitely the food is the most important. Like find good Mexican food and then everything else in life will
right.
fall into place.
Which is
Yeah.
why I'm so excited for Team 25 because I've been telling everybody like Anaheim's hosting. I'm so
Oh
excited.
yeah.
But the most important part is that Anaheim's roots, right? It's so like I would say, I don't know. As you take out Anaheim Hills, because Anaheim Hills is like its own category of itself, is where the bougie people,
Okay.
rich, uber rich people live.
Okay.
Like I think the cheapest house in Anaheim Hills is like $4 million, right? So you
Oh my
so you
God.
take
Yeah.
that group of people aside, right? So you just cut off like half the city and you just keep Anaheim proper not being on a hill. I would say like 70-80% of the population is Hispanic.
Wow. Yeah.
So so
Yeah, that's
and
awesome.
my hometown, my parents' hometown, everybody lives in Anaheim.
Okay. Yeah.
My boys again, we used to live in San Diego, so we just recently moved back to
Mhm.
Orange County, and we're just spending our weekends visiting family. And my son, my oldest son, he's like, "Who are these people?" I'm like, "Those are your cousins." And then we'll go somewhere else and like, "Who are these people?" I'm like, "Those are your cousins." We're
Yes.
like, "Wait, but it was a different house." I'm like, "They're your
Now,
cousins too."
yeah.
We'll be at the mall and we'll run into people and they're like, "Who are those people?" I'm like, "Those are your cousins." And we're like, and my son's like, "How many cousins do we have?" I'm like,
Yeah.
"Well, just your grandpa had 15 kids."
Yeah.
And
No, that's
so
like the typical Mexican experience, I feel like, as a kid, is meeting people like, literally meeting people for the first time and being like, "This is your uncle, whoever, whatever," and, like, they're great friends of the family and all this stuff, and I'm like, "I've never met this person in my life, I don't know you," like, whatever, but especially, like, going back to Mexico City, we would have every year my great-grandma would host a huge family reunion in her house, and it was, like, hundreds of people that would show up to this thing of just, like, cousins and uncles and great aunts and what I mean, it's just like family is such a huge part of the Mexican culture. So
It
I feel like
is, yeah.
that's a
When I
totally typical experience.
when my wife and I got married, we had a budget for 200 people, and so I
Mhm.
invited my closest families,
Yeah.
and I told my wife, I'm like, "I think there's enough seats available for, like, your mom and your dad." Like, your 3 sisters,
Yeah.
and, like, their boyfriends are questionable at this point because there might not be room.
Yeah, sorry. They can wait outside, like, it's
Yeah.
fine.
It was just like my wife's like, "How in the world do you have such a large family?" I'm like, "We own, like, half of Anaheim."
Yeah. I feel like too, like, even particularly Mexican weddings are, like, next level. Like, sometimes it's like I've been invited to weddings of people I don't even know. Like, literally don't even know, but just, like, on the street, I chatted with them and they were like, "Oh, my daughter's getting married this weekend, you should come." And it's, like, a huge, like, community thing, everyone in the neighborhood is invited and everyone brings something. Typically, the women are cooking something and they bring that, and yeah,
And
weddings
usually
weddings
something
can
like
get
real tacos and
huge.
not a s and real tacos and not a sandwich.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, really, really good Mexican food at the
Yeah.
wedding, so,
I
yeah.
I went to Houston once. I guess I didn't spend enough time. I was just in downtown, so I didn't really get to see the
Okay.
vibe there of I guess there's, like, pockets of Hispanicness throughout the US, right? But you at least when you leave Southern California, you really gotta go looking for it, is what I've learned.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I actually was born and raised in Virginia. There's not a huge Mexican community there. Shocker. Um, so it was always kind of interesting to me that my dad had immigrated there and, like, kind of ended up there, but anyways, um, but it was always something that I felt like I really had to seek out, and then being here in Houston, it's great. Like, there's a really big Mexican population, Hispanic population in general, but particularly Mexican population, um, which has been really great to even just, casually make those connections with people or speak in Spanish with people or get
Yeah.
recommendations for
It's
where they
always
got the
nice.
best tacos or whatever. So,
Yeah, the
yeah,
Spanish part, I think, is the part that I like the most because as a professional, I don't get to practice Spanish a whole lot, especially within the Atlassian
totally.
ecosystem. Like, everybody speaks English. Like, I was even talking with Fede,
Yes.
from Dizer, right? And I'm like, everything is so English based. I'm like, I would love to just spend more time in Spanish.
Yeah. No, it's so true, and it is something that I miss. I actually lived in Mexico for several years as well, and so that was a bit of a transition coming back to the US, which I think too is why I landed in Texas because I wanted a good mix. But I remember, like, talking with some of my friends from Mexico when I came back and was like, "Yeah, I just even really miss speaking Spanish in my day to day or, whatever." So, which I get that with my family, but not so much as you mentioned in a professional setting. Um, I have like I have a teammate on my small company at Release Team that happens to speak Spanish as well. So whenever we Slack in Spanish, which is really great, it's really fun for me to just even have that little bit of connection back to the language or the culture or whatever. So I definitely would encourage you, or even just like Slack me if you're having a slow day and
Yeah,
we
no,
can
well,
speak
now
in
I know.
Spanish. I would
Yeah.
love that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
No,
think you're right too. I
again,
think like in the tech space or in like the Atlassian space in general, it's just everything is centered obviously around English. English is still considered the dominant language globally that and most people in other countries learn English. We're not as great in the United States about teaching kids from a very young age other languages. It's still very English centric, but
right.
hopefully that will change in the future.
I have to admit, so with my sons, we started my oldest in Spanish, but we
Mhm.
moved to St. Louis, and
Okay.
it's very there's not a lot of diversity in St. Louis.
Sure.
And
Okay.
so my son going through preschool and stuff had a really, 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 really hard time engaging with his teachers and daycare providers because he couldn't
Yeah.
speak the language and they couldn't speak his language. So we
Mhm.
kind of made a shift of like English only in the household for now.
Okay.
But now that he's
Yeah.
12, like he's like on a 600-day streak on Duolingo for
Oh,
Spanish.
nice.
And so now he's
Yeah.
taking the initiative to really learn. And then also because again, we just recently moved, so now we're exposed to all
Mhm.
of the like we were just in Phoenix visiting our family, and we spent a lot of time now because we have the luxury to go visit family. Everything's in Spanish. The whole everybody in the family is in Spanish. So my son's now more active because he's getting frustrated that he can't understand what's going on.
Yeah,
Right. So out of his
sure.
own curiosity, he's like, I have to learn this stuff so I can figure out when they're talking about me.
Yes, that's also a very good skill. Yeah, it's like, okay, I mostly want to know this for like the gossip to be like, okay, who's
The
talking
hot
about
gossip.
what and like what's going on. So
Yeah,
yeah, I think
I watch a
it's super
podcast.
useful.
I watch a podcast called Las Meras Meras. I don't know if you've seen it,
Okay.
but they're from
I don't think
Jalisco.
so.
I love
Okay.
these ladies. They're from Jalisco, and
Yeah.
they just gossip the whole time, and like I don't know what it is about other cultures, right? But in at least in Hispanic culture, like gossip is. I used to have a pastor when in an older church where he was like, "Men are not gossipers. We're just extremely communicative men." And so
Sure. Yeah.
like gossip for us is like in our culture, like it's just it's part of your DNA almost.
I know. Thank you for saying this, Alex, because sometimes when I'm like, whatever, trying to get the tea, trying to get the gossip, I'm like, it's actually not my fault. Like, I'm Mexican. This is
I was
part of
raised
who
like
I
that.
am. I can't help it. Yeah, like café y chisme, that's like what I go off of, like what I live for. So like I have to
Yeah.
have
Do
it.
you have any
So yeah, I
sisters?
totally get it. Sorry?
Do you have any sisters?
I have one sister and I have two brothers. I'm the
Okay.
oldest.
'Cause I'm an only
Yeah.
child, so it's really usually really hard for me to do any of that stuff because it's
Oh
just me,
man,
like
yeah,
me and
that's
my parents,
hard.
right? But with my sister-in-laws, like
Yeah.
we try to get together and talk a little bit more.
Yes, yeah. No, it's always fun. Or even just like with friends, to get together and I think of it as like it's current events. You're just
Yeah.
catching up on the news. It's not gossip necessarily. So yeah.
I've been watching this British girl that married a Mexican guy. She lives in
Hmm.
somewhere, I think in Texas somewhere. And
Okay.
like she just discovered she was trying to like cook something like a tortilla or something. And
Yeah.
she's like, "Where's the comal?" And the her husband's
Yeah.
like, "It's under the stove. It's in the stove." And she's
Yeah.
like, "Why would it be in the stove?" And we're like, "'Cause the
Yeah.
guy's like, well, that's where we put our stuff." And like
That's where
every
all the pots
Hispanic
and pans
like
go.
that's where
Yeah.
all the pots and pans go. And it's like it's just
Yeah.
mind blowing to people when they come out like to visit my parents' house and
Hmm.
like we want to bake something. I'm like, hold up. It's like a whole thing. I gotta
Yeah.
take everything out.
Yes. I know. I have to do the same thing, which I guess I don't know why, like I guess baking isn't a huge part of the cuisine or the culture or
Yeah,
something. I don't
it
know. But
really
yeah, I
isn't
totally store all my stuff in the oven. It's
in the
just
oven.
always
Yeah.
been that way.
Yeah, it's so weird. Like now, so now I moved into a house that was not owned by a Hispanic, and so we have like the little rack above, and my wife's like staring. I'm like, she's like, what's
Mhm.
that for? I'm like, I believe they put what we put in there up there,
Oh, yeah. Okay. That
and
makes
she's like, why
sense.
would we do
Yeah.
that? It's just gonna fall.
I know, yeah.
And then
Which
she's
I
like
mean, it makes
vertically,
perfect sense to put it in the oven.
yeah,
That's
but
what
then
I
she's
think.
vertically impaired, right? So she's like, I don't have to even bend over to get into the oven, but like up
Oh,
there, she's got to
yeah.
look like a whole thing.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's super
Just
convenient and it's right
cultures are
there and
so fun. So much fun, and
yeah.
it's so rare. I think as global as the Atlassian community is, there's a lot of European, right? A lot of
Yeah.
European. But
Yes.
once you start getting to like Latin America, like it starts dwindling down quite a bit. I don't see a whole
Yes.
lot. Like we have like three, like Techno 4, Dizer, and like I think there's one more.
Yeah.
So it's we
No, you're
definitely don't get
right.
to enjoy it as much as like other cultures.
Yes. No, I think you're right. And it is something that I've noticed, I think, just by the nature of my background and the fact that my culture is very important to me. It's always something that's in the back of my mind. Like I'm always looking for more like Latino representation. Um, and I think I'm hopeful that it's something that will pick up in the future. I know obviously with trends in nearshoring and things like this, like even Mexico is being considered, one of the more like technically competent places to look for
Mhm.
resources and things like this. So I do hope that there's an upward trend of that because it is a huge market, first of all, that I think maybe not a lot of people pay close attention to. But also too, and even I'll just speak for Mexico, I feel like as a people, we are very innovative. So, yeah,
You
I think
know,
it would be
it's
cool
so
to see
interesting
more
you
representation.
Yeah, it's so interesting you say that, right? Because again, working hard, working smart, right? And Jira is such a productivity tool. Atlassian is all about that teamwork and productivity. And like you really don't appreciate a group of hardworking people until you see like a Hispanic cultural type of worker, right? Because like we just grew up differently. Like the way like hard work in our culture is so much different than what I would see hard work anywhere else, like in my
Yeah.
professional experience, right? Like it
Yes.
doesn't seem like hard work when you're in an office space type of thing,
Yes.
right? But also
Yeah.
the creative solutions, right? Like when I look at my in-laws and I look at my uncles, right, that are not educated people that just work for a living, but like
Yes.
even looking at my dad who doesn't even speak English and like the way he thinks, the way he puts things together, the way he creatively just forges things out of nothing. I'm like, I couldn't even
Totally.
come close to that. And I have like God knows how many papers behind my name
Yes.
or
No,
degrees,
it
I should say.
is. Yeah, no, you're so right about that. I think there's something where like we would call something, and sometimes it can be in an almost humorous way of how inventive or creative Mexicans be can be with even with, just sometimes limited resources, or things like that. We call it like a mexicanada, which is basically just like some invention that like only a Mexican could think of like crazy ways to do, or like you'll see photos of people who like somehow have Jimmy rigged, something to be on top of a motorcycle that then works with this, that then, so, just like really kind of crazy out of the box things, but that you're right, I think is really driven by that work ethic that is such an integral part, again, of the culture. And I think it's something that maybe people like you and I, we do kind of grow up thinking like, oh, well, this is normal. Why would anyone not operate in this way? And then when you do enter into communities or spaces that are not majority Latino, then you can kind of see like, oh, wait a minute, maybe this isn't the norm. And, this is, but it's something really special and something that um, I think is highly valued by people even outside of the community. I think that's one thing that people usually tend to think really positively about the Mexican community is that we are very hard workers. And that's just something that even from when you're really little, that is something that is really ingrained in you. And I think particularly Mexican Americans or, first generation Americans, we have that such a strong example of our parents immigrating to a different country, having to become accustomed to a new language, an entirely new culture, way of living, and really most times starting from the very bottom and then
Right.
working their way up
And
to achieve the quote unquote American dream is a really strong example of that work ethic.
and it's so interesting you say that, right? Because my parents did the same thing, right? So my grandparents would come in um to work the fields here in southern and northern California.
Hmm.
I think very, very indicative of like a lot of Hispanic Mexican cultures coming in during the
Yes.
seasons. And if you've
Yes.
ever seen, there's a movie on Amazon Prime about the astronaut with Michael
Oh
Serna.
yeah. I haven't seen it.
It's
Yeah.
really, really good.
Yeah,
Like
I know what you're
you
talking
really
about.
enjoy it, along with the Hot Cheeto movie. So we have two good movies that represent our work culture.
Yes.
You should watch the Hot Cheetos movie as well.
Yes.
If you haven't seen that one. But anyway, so my grandparents came in like that, stayed. My
Mhm.
my parents, my mom and her brothers, they were like at the tail end of what I'll call the suffrage, right? Because they got
Mhm.
to go. My mom, I think, started in sixth grade here in the United
Mhm.
States, and my
Yeah.
uncles were like in kindergarten. My mom's the
Okay.
oldest, right? So I have uncles that started here from kindergarten, but my grandpa had 15 kids, and my oldest uncle would be 90, right? And my
Mhm.
parents are
Wow, yeah.
60s, right? So
Mhm.
so they would have had 30-year gap of older brothers and siblings that didn't have that luxury of going through the American school system. They had to come in and work
Yes.
as a 10-year-old, as a 12-year-old, right? But versus
Yes.
my parents didn't. They worked still, but they also still had to go to school now. Right,
Right.
so they had that advantage, but my finishing high school was, like, what every one of my uncles finished. The
Yeah.
American ones, the ones that were raised more American, right? All my other uncles, school wasn't even, like, a thing that
Yes.
was even on their
Yeah.
radar, right?
Mhm.
And but for me, I'm the first college, b born or raised.
Yes.
I'm the first one with the master's raised, right?
Oh, awesome.
And
Yeah.
and now I have my children, and with my children, it's interesting what you were saying, right? Because I like if I compare me and my wife, like my wife and I, like we agree on a lot of things, but the one thing we definitely disagree a lot on is our work culture. Mainly because
Okay.
like she grew up working her whole childhood,
Yeah.
right? So she would go to school, expected to have perfect grades, but then expected to come
Hmm.
home and work,
Yeah.
right? And I grew up, I never worked until I graduated from college because my parents wanted me
Hmm.
focused on my school only. Because we didn't have
Hmm.
we didn't have like a my wife had to help work to make ends meet.
Yeah.
But because my parents were a little older now, right? My parents were in the 30s when they had me. They've already had
Hmm.
worked to figure out the whole ends meet thing. And so I
Hmm.
had the luxury. She says I had the luxury of just focusing on school versus she
Yes.
didn't, right? She had a school and work. But
Hmm.
now that we have our kids, we have everything. There is no
Hmm.
subject for my wife and I today, right? Like we both have our degrees, we both have these amazing careers, and
Hmm.
we're seeing the demise on the at the children level because now my kids never know what it's like to wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning to go work just so that you can eat that day.
Yeah, I think like it's interesting, and I think my experience echoes a little bit of what yours was as well. I know my dad, it was really important to him that his kids have the opportunity to receive a good education. Academics were very highly valued in my household, and that was the focus of my labor, if you want to call it that, was definitely like, okay, we really want you to do really well in school, so please like take all the time you need, like be involved in sports and clubs and whatever, and just really focus on the academics, because I do think there was a sense of that childhood being lost when you're an immigrant. Um, because you do just have to grow up so fast. You have to start working so fast to be able to provide food on the table.
Yeah.
Luckily, my dad, he is my hero, and I'm so proud of him just because, and it's perfect because it's about to be Father's Day. But he really is, because I think it's incredible to think about someone coming and starting from very little, starting from scratch, starting from nothing, and then achieving a career in a place where, you can be financially stable. You can see your kids go to college and graduate. My brother is the one with the master's. He's way smarter than me. But and just be able to witness this much upward mobility within the span of one generation is pretty incredible. But I think my parents wanted to also afford me that opportunity of, okay, we don't want you to be stressed about having to, work or whatever during high school. During college, I worked, but um, so that you can focus on being a kid and your education. Um, but I do think that there are still ways that that work ethic is instilled in both of us. I think too, even you mentioning, going to school, excelling in school, getting your master's, I think too that's also a testament to the work ethic. It looks different in the manifestation of it,
Yeah.
but it is still that work ethic. It is, and I think, some of that credit should still be shared, and I think too, it's not necessarily a bad thing that your kids don't know what it is to get up at 3 in the morning and work, because we wouldn't want that for ourselves either if
Right,
we were a
yeah.
kid, we would be like,
It
"This
just wasn't
sucks,"
a
like
necessity though, right? And I think that's kind of because I it's interesting you bring about the work ethic in the school because I have a cousin. We're very close in age. I think he's like 2 years older than me, but
Mhm.
he finished high school and that was it. Like his dad was like, "Okay,
Yeah.
you're done with school. You finished this requirement that we're legally obligated so that we don't go to
Yes.
jail type of thing.
Yeah.
Now roll up your sleeves. It's time for you to get at work, right?"
Yeah.
And growing up, I again, he's 2 years ahead of me, so he saw me not follow in his footsteps, right? And
Mhm.
I went the way of my parents bought me my car so I can go to school,
Mhm.
and I had like school was such a heavy emphasis on that my parents instilled into me, and I remember my cousin telling my mom so many times like put him to work because he doesn't do anything all day. My mom's like
Mhm.
his requirement, his job is to get good grades. Like that is his work.
Right.
It
Yes.
looks different than your work. That doesn't mean he's not working.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that can carry over into lots of other things that we don't necessarily classify as, okay, this is work or this is a job, but it is something, and I remember even when I was in high school and working towards, okay, what colleges am I going to apply to? What scholarships do I need to apply to? Because that also was a caveat, right? Of like, okay, we're going to give you like time to just focus on your studies, but you need to be applying for scholarships because something needs to pay for your education.
Right.
So that was in and of itself, a part of that job. But and I do think that's changing, and particularly I think, even within the United States, like Americans who are Latinos, that is changing generation to generation as, again, I think the upward mobility is increasing. Um, and even like the Latino population is growing. I think even Latinas are the fastest growing population of people to get master's degrees, which is amazing. So we're, even as a population, we're becoming more educated, more active in a quote unquote professional workplace, um,
And
which
that's so
I think is great.
yeah, and that's so critical too, right? Because something we haven't touched as we've been talking about this whole cultural landscape is Latino women do have a different expectation to contribute from a family perspective versus a
Yeah.
male, right? And
Yes.
again, going back to we were just in Phoenix a couple of weeks ago. My I have 30 something members of my family that all moved to Phoenix. So my uncle with his
Okay.
8 kids moved, and each of those 8 kids now are
Oh
married and
wow.
have kids and whatnot. So
Yeah.
it's a huge group that live in just that one little city, that little neighborhood, really, right?
Okay.
And so
Yeah.
my uncle and my cousins, we all got together because we came over. It's the first time we had seen him in like 19 years or something like that. This crazy
Oh
amount of
wow.
time, right? It's been a while.
Yeah.
And so we went and yeah, we had like the whole family gathering and whatnot. And my wife and I were very Americanized, right? And so I went and got my plate of food and I sat down with my food.
Mm, I
And
know. Yeah, that's a no no.
all the girls were like, "What is wrong with you?" They're looking at my wife
Yeah.
like, "What is wrong with you?" My wife's like, "What is wrong with you girls?"
Yeah, you raise an excellent point, and unfortunately, Alex, now this podcast will last 5 hours because I could go on and on about this.
I'm all for it. How you?
um, yeah, this is something I'm also extremely passionate about. I think it's not a secret that machismo is still a really big
Big, yeah.
part of the culture. Um, Again, I do think there is a degree of separation with Mexican Americans. There tends to be a little bit more progressive thinking with that, but um, it is interesting to me because my dad was. I never felt growing up that I was treated differently than my brother. Typically, I feel like it's an experience that in Mexican households, the young, even starting from a young age, the girls are the ones who are doing more of the chores. The boys are the ones who can go out with their friends, while the girls, who are you going with? At what time?
Yeah, not even allowed to
No,
have a
you're not
boyfriend.
going. No, whatever. Yeah, no, none of that. Like, which that kind of was my experience. My dad
That's a
was
whole
very
different
great, but
conversation,
anyways,
right?
yes, yeah. But I never got the sense that my family or my culture looked at me differently because I was a woman. Now, obviously, outside of my family, that experience was very different. I think within the culture, there still is a lot of, sexism or prejudices. That's even a big one that still, lots of Mexican Americans, it's like, okay, or if you have a partner or if you're with someone or whatever, you as the woman are supposed to fix the plate of the man, bring it back to him. The women in general are expected to get married, have children, be 100% in control of their household.
Right.
But I think even now, the expectation that women don't work as much in a professional setting has also gone away. So in some senses, we kind of have this double workload of, okay, yes, go to your job, be efficient and productive, and again, hard work ethic in your job, and then come home and
And
do
do it
all
all
of the
over.
cooking and do all of the cleaning and do all of the stuff that needs to be done with the kids. And it takes a toll. And even in the United States, I mean, when we think about Latinas in the workplace, that's the largest pay gap that there is from, every dollar that a white man earns, a Latina is earning 58 cents or something
Right.
ridiculous. Um, so it is still this really big inequality and this really big discrepancy that I think, again, and not this is, I think, within the culture, we need to steadily be combating this idea that Latino women are having to take on this extra brunt of the work and be serving men in other ways. And I think socialization is, a lot of time women in many cultures are socialized to be more caring or empathetic or you know, serving of others, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think helping other people is amazing. Um, but I do think that particularly in the Mexican culture, there is a dichotomy a little bit of what a Mexican woman looks like because on the one hand, it is this sense of like, okay, Mexican women are very strong, they're very passionate, they're very, whatever, fire. There's things that
Right.
stereotypically go into, things that are like, okay, whatever. But there is kind of this other side of that coin where sometimes I feel like, yeah, well, the reason we're so strong is because we're tired of putting up with your crap all the time. Like,
We gotta get out
like it's
ahead,
just
right?
like,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I think too, in my family, I have lots of amazing examples of very strong Mexican women. My abuelita is another one of my heroes, and she has always been a very present force in my life who has said, don't, no te dejes, like, don't let anyone, walk over you. You are a strong woman. You can do whatever you want to
Mhm.
do in this life because you are a Mexican woman, not in spite of it. Um, so yeah.
It's so interesting everything you say there. I want to bring up 2 points from my personal life here. One,
Mhm.
my wife is an engineer. She's Mexican as well, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I feel like I'm very fortunate that I've met my wife and that my life worked out the way we did because my wife have been equals our entire
Mhm.
careers and our entire lives, right? We've always
Mhm.
earned the same. We've always worked in the same space. We're we had the same backgrounds, right? We had the same everything, except that she had to work a lot more, right? Coming in from a super
Mhm.
low income family versus my family is
Yeah.
a little bit more middle class. That's like the only difference that we
Yes.
have. But other
Yeah.
than that, like we have everything else kind of the same. But like even today, like when we have like a problem, like if my mom or somebody in my family has a problem, they go to me. And I tell my mom, like, I don't have time. Like my wife can do it.
Mhm.
And she's like, no, this is a man's job. I don't want her to do it. And I'm like, she's just as
Mhm.
capable as me for everything that you need me
Yeah.
to help you with. And so
Yeah.
that's still a stigma that we're trying to aggressively fight almost every time we're interacting with anybody in our family. Because like
Yes.
they just don't believe that my wife can do it because she's a female. And it's not for
Mhm.
any other reason other than she's a woman versus me being a man.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and the second part that I wanted to just bring up real quickly was my mother-in-law is a very strong woman, very strong
Mhm.
Latina woman, right? But
Mhm.
what I see, my observation that I see with her, you don't mess with her. Like she's very firm, very assertive, very much a boss until my father-in-law says something, then she has to comply.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's so weird because you see that she has this energy and this like will to want to achieve more, but it's
Mhm.
capped at whatever my father-in-law allows her to do. And it's so weird. But her
Yeah.
daughters don't have any of that, but still
Yeah.
it's interesting dynamic to observe in our culture.
It is. Yeah, it is. And I do think, again, I think generation by generation, this is changing, um,
Yeah, my
which
wife
is
doesn't if I try to pull any
amazing.
of that on my wife, I'd be a dead man.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, no, I think it is sad to observe that, especially when it's, when you're seeing it with your own family of like, hey, like this is, a woman in my life who I really love and value, and I'm witnessing that someone who I also love and value is not treating her in the most respectful way, or is maybe
Right.
capping
Yeah.
the potential, or whatever you might
But
want to
but
say
my
in
mother
this
does it because
example.
my mother does it because she had 3 brothers. and
Yeah.
they were the providers. They were the ones that were expected to do it all. So my mom's
Yes.
mind was like, my mom had a very specific place and role in life,
Yes.
and she just can't fathom or understand like why would my wife have a
Yeah.
brother's privilege?
Right. Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because I think the flip side of that, of, Mexican women feeling, this sense of oppression of the machismo of the culture, is also this tremendous pressure that is put on the men. Machismo doesn't serve anyone really, because
Right.
at the end of the day, like, not only are we oppressing and potentially silencing women, but then this immense pressure of, like you said, of someone coming to you with an issue and you saying, well, okay, well, can you go to someone else for this right now? Like, my load's a little full right now. And it's, no, well, that's a man's job. Is this, I can imagine, incredible pressure of then, like, oh no, well, then I have to do this. I have to,
But
step up
I
and
rub it,
figure out this
yeah,
problem.
I brush it off though because I'm like,
Yeah,
my wife
good.
and I just
Yes.
grew up with such, well, we have such a good understanding of, we share, like we're equals.
Yes. Yes. And again, I think that's something that we're seeing more and more. And especially mixing that with the culture of the United States, I think, there's a lot more of this
Right.
evolution of, okay, we are equal partners. How can we work together to share the responsibilities of, whatever it might be? So,
But tying this whole conversation back to like an Atlassian ecosystem, right? So this is
yeah.
something I witnessed quite a bit, right? But even kind of leaving Mexican culture, our culture aside, because I think we're qualified to talk about it. But you see it
Mhm.
in other cultures, like in the Indian culture, right? Where women aren't like I had a team. I had an Indian woman and an Indian male, and
Mhm.
they were both my Jira admins. And when I was
Mhm.
interviewing them, for some reason, my boss, we had them together in the same room, and I asked her a question, and I directed it at her, and the male would
Mhm.
jump in every time, wouldn't even allow her to answer. And I had to tell him to stop. I'm like, "I'm asking her." And even after I explicitly told him, "You need to, like, hush it so that I can hear her
Mhm.
thoughts," he
Yeah.
still stepped in every single time or corrected her
Mhm.
or did whatever. So, like, it is, I think Atlassian focuses on this whole concept of teamwork, but I don't think we give enough light to the cultural differences that make teamwork really hard.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point that you raise. I think too, it's amazing that you were able to step in and say something. 'Cause I feel like oftentimes it takes sometimes another man to call out the behavior of another man to then, it seems like in this case, maybe it didn't work, but
It seems odd to me, but it must seem more odd to them to it must seem disrespectful that I'm stopping him in his eyes, right? To
yeah,
me,
it
it's
could
a
be.
normal. I'm like,
Yeah.
I grew up with such equality that I'm like, it doesn't make sense. Why they would why there's I didn't grow up with machismo. My dad's a very
Yeah.
passive person. In fact, my dad would pay money to not talk to people.
Yeah.
So I didn't grow up like that, but I do see it in my culture, and I do see it in other cultures, and
Yes.
I just think it
Yeah.
makes teamwork hard. But sorry, I totally interrupted you.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, no, just kind of going back to the question, I do think that that understanding of cultural differences is extremely obviously important to teamwork. And I think even now, more than ever, after COVID, after remote work, after now, again, obviously offshoring and globalization and global teams having to work together is not anything new, but it certainly has been accelerated, I think. And I do happen to think that even speaking outside of the actual products that Atlassian offers, even the community that Atlassian creates, I do think, and this is just my experience, even having worked with other software vendors, I do think that they do a pretty good job of creating that sense of community, and openness and collaboration for others. Like, I know when I have events with Atlassian or things like that, I always look forward to it just because I'm excited to see people that I know and people that I talk to on the day to day. And it seems very welcoming and opening and accepting. Um, but I do think that even just thinking outside of Atlassian and thinking about the professional workplace in general, those cultural differences do make a really big difference. And I think even going back to, speaking a different language in the workplace, how, traditionally people could even kind of like get in trouble for that. I think now is being more accepted and valued, because I think really what we need to be shifting the mindset more towards is exactly that, placing an explicit value on cultural differences and figuring out a way to work together to use all of the benefits from those different cultures for good. Like even example, like the Mexican ingenuity, even apart from the humorous side of it, like
Yeah.
it can be helpful to have that kind of a mindset, or whatever other cultures you want to kind of pull and take from. But at the end of the day, like we all have to work together. um, we all get the opportunity to work together, because I do think that is a blessing in certain ways to have these different and shared experiences. But it is a matter of, okay, how can we create an environment that really brings these cultural differences to work together
Together,
and to be at
yeah.
the forefront of the work that we're doing.
And it's interesting because most of the places that I've ever worked at were in Southern California, and I
Mhm.
never once I always worked with everybody. Southern California has a huge Hispanic population, but there's also a huge
Yes.
Asian population.
Yes.
Huge Asian, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of Caucasian population as well, right? And so
Yes.
working at the Boeing company, it was an interesting experience because mostly everybody was white.
Mhm.
Then the next tier after that was Asian, because Asians, at least growing up, were like they were the ones that focus more on education, more focus more on achieving more, versus like in the Hispanic cultures, at least in tech, man. I've never seen that. There's not a whole lot of representation. There's not a whole lot that want to work in tech
Yes.
or that aspire to be in tech.
Yeah.
But that was Southern California. When I moved to St. Louis, I was the only Hispanic in like the building.
Yeah.
And I never
Yeah.
had felt more out of place ever in my life.
Yes. Yeah. No, I totally get it. It's interesting too, because my background in my career, I actually started in nonprofit. So I actually was working with immigrant populations for a couple years right out of school. So that was more of a natural fit, I guess. And obviously, a majority of the kids I was working with were Latino, but we also had like a large population of Northern African students as well. Um, and when I made the switch kind of into tech, it was a bit of a culture shock, in that I had never been like basically the only Latina in a space. It's a little bit disorienting sometimes. And then even too, so I'm not on the technical side of things. I can imagine that it would ring true as well, that there's a lower representation of the Latino population in the technical space, but in the sales and marketing and channel side of things, um, it's a smaller portion of representation as well. And I think even too, like being a woman in the space compounds that a bit too. Um,
Yeah, no, I can feel that. I married one of like 3 female engineers at my college.
yeah,
Like, in the
yeah,
whole college of engineering, there was like 3 girls, and I married one of them.
yes, yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. I think too sometimes when we are a minority population in a space, things even like imposter syndrome can kind of creep in of, oh, wait a minute, like what am I doing here? Like, I'm just some Mexican American girl. I don't know what's going on, whatever. It's just, I think it can be too a little bit of an extra burden of feeling like, okay, well, I need to represent my culture well. I need to make sure and navigate conversations in the workspace well, that
Mhm.
again reflects very highly on my culture or my country, or things like that. So yeah, I definitely think it's interesting to think about,
Any
what it's
any
like
thoughts on
to.
how do we fix it going forward? I'll share one last story before you answer. In college, I had a teacher really. He wasn't a professor by the definition of a professor.
Okay.
He stepped in. Our actual PhD professor, he just didn't
Mhm.
show up one day.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and the department chair was scrambling to find somebody, so he went and grabbed the lab tech, the computer tech, and
Mhm.
told him, "You have a master's, right?" And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Good, that's enough. Go teach his class. Here's the book."
Oh,
And
wow.
so he shows up to my class, electrical design of circuits and whatnot, and he has to teach this class to us now, right? And not qualified, not anything that like I would have asked for my money back, right? Because this was the most underqualified person I'd ever that was teaching this very expensive
Yeah.
class. Hispanic, or Mexican specifically himself, right?
Mhm.
Um, he taught me one thing because he didn't know what the heck he was doing, right? And he taught me that anything that we were doing, that we were engineers, and that it was our job to figure it out. This
Mhm.
guy was at my wedding. He's been in all my kids' birthdays and
Oh,
big giant
wow.
celebrations. He has such a profound impact on my life where it was this thing where like the one person you would think that would never have been able to make like a difference in somebody's life because of their qualifications, but had the most profound
Yeah.
impact on my wife and I, to the point that he's like part of our family now. Right?
Oh,
It's so
wow.
interesting, right? So like you just never know, like having that ethic of like, hey, I'm Mexican ingenuity, like you said, right? And go figure it out.
Mhm.
That's the best thing you can teach anybody.
Yes.
Which is very profound. So anyway, so I was like, how do we fix this, right? Because I feel like I got to my career because of him. Like that serendipity moment of like, here's somebody who had no idea and clearly didn't let that stop him.
Mhm.
And now I'm teaching these values to my kids so that my
Yes.
kids, when they get stuck on something, I'm like, look, you're an engineer, you figure it out. Right. But it's
Mhm.
this profound principle that I'm hopefully my kid being a billionaire or whatever he gets to achieve, right? Take
Yes.
that. You're an engineer, figure it out. You're Hispanic, figure it out. Don't let the world tell you you can't. And so
Mhm.
what are your like thoughts on like how do we fix this fact that Hispanics and Latinos don't have that mentality of like you're an engineer, you can figure it out, even though the world tells you you can't.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. Oh my God, something just dropped. I think I don't even know that it's necessarily a problem of the mentality because I think we do have the mentality. Again, I think the Mexican people, we are very resilient, we are very innovative, we are very hardworking, and I think it's just tapping into those parts of our identity, those parts of our culture that sometimes I almost feel like we maybe have to leave at the door when we go into the office. So I think maybe it's even reframing of like, okay, how actually then can we incorporate all of our identity into the work that we're doing in a professional space? Because I do think that if we're able to fully tap into those pieces of the culture, then and I do think for, that has gotten the Latino population a long
Even
way,
better.
particularly speaking in the United States. Um, but I think, combating maybe the imposter syndrome piece of it or that feeling of, okay, well, I don't know, like, can I really figure it out? I don't know. I think, and maybe again, this is just the way that I was brought up, but it is just a little bit of that mentality of like, you just got to get after it. Like, you can do it. Like, it's just really sticking to that mentality of just work
Yeah.
hard
But
and
it's an
stick
interesting
it out.
mentality though, right? Because like if our parents don't instill that value, right? Or nobody tells us. I
Mhm.
always tell people like I love doing like K through 12 STEM outreach because I'm the first, as I told you, first everything to do anything in my family, right?
Yeah.
I accidentally became an engineer. The
Mhm.
only reason I became an engineer is because I wanted a 5 period day in high school,
Mm.
and I had to shift my schedule, and I
Yeah.
found a teacher whose last name was the second grade teacher's last name.
Okay.
So I took the class thinking, hoping it was the same person, and it was like it was my
Yeah.
second grade teacher's husband.
Oh, cool.
And it
Yeah.
happened to be a web design course that changed
Okay.
me from wanting to become a bio major to a computer scientist and an
Oh,
engineer.
wow.
And if it
Yeah.
wouldn't have been for just the fact that, again, I had that second grade teacher who has a husband who taught a web design course that I had no
Yeah.
idea. I literally went off of just the last name. I would have never become who I was because I didn't know, I didn't have anybody guiding me and coaching me. And I think a lot of non-Hispanic families have success stories already. There's not a whole lot of
Yeah.
success stories in our world to see who
Yes.
do we
Yes.
want to aspire to, or what are the paths that are available to us.
Totally. Yes. No, I think that's a really good point too, and definitely was part of my experience as well, is I felt like even though my family had achieved a certain level of success here in the United States, I didn't necessarily have a blueprint, right? Whereas like I felt like some of my other counterparts did, because their dad worked at the company that his dad started, and like then Junior will also be the owner of the company. So it just like not having that blueprint for you also can be a big challenge of that piece as well. Because yeah, I felt like I was navigating for the first time of like, oh, okay, well, how do I apply for college? Like, what do I want to do? Like, I don't know, like it's so yeah, I think it is a big part of it is having certain qualities instilled in you, whether that be in your family or in your culture. And again, not that any of these characteristics that I'm, singing praises of Mexican culture, not that those are specific just to Mexican culture, right? Like lots of many cultures share those, same qualities or other great qualities. But I think particularly in the Mexican community, we we do still see, with generation and generation, that these characteristics, it might change in the way that they're expressed, but there is still a big emphasis put on, the work ethic and just believing that you can do something. Um, so I think to answer the question of how do we, combat that feeling of, oh, well, I don't know, I can't figure it out. I think it's just tapping back into who you are, who you were raised, in the community to be, and say, no, okay, I deserve to be here. I'm here for a reason. And if anything, it'll just be to prove other people wrong. So,
Yeah.
which is also great, So
And so a
yeah.
dream of mine that I always kind of flirt with is like, I wonder what would happen if you take, like, again, the hard work ethic of the Hispanic culture, Latin American culture, and
Hmm.
give them Jira. Like, organize them a little bit, right? Because I feel like our cultures can achieve so much, but then they don't even know what this agile is, right? Because you don't know what you don't know, right? And I'm like, I always wonder, like, what would happen if, like, I converted all my videos into Spanish and tapped a new region of just like folks that just don't know what Agile or Jira is, or what it could do, or why they could take advantage of it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting point. I think you should totally do it. I think that would be awesome. If you started creating content in Spanish, would be so amazing. And again, like you said, tapping into a market, and potentially even serving as education for people who, or professional workspaces who they're maybe not there in their agile or DevOps or whatever journey that they might be on in their in, software development and IT. So yeah, I think it's a great idea, and it is something that, going back to, what would happen if we were able to connect, the work ethic with the capabilities of Jira or even other tools in the Atlassian suite. Um, yeah, I mean, there's a saying too that like there's a saying in Spanish that is like Mexico is poor because they want to be, because there's this idea that if we were given all of the resources in the world, we would conquer everything. Like our ingenuity, our hard work ethic, like, we're just poor because we want to be, which not that, I'm not
Right.
obviously I love Mexico. I'm just saying like that's the saying within Mexico, kind of poking fun at, you know, this sense of like, well, it would be total world domination if you gave, Latin America like Jira and all these other products.
Right, right.
So
Yeah. I have a little joke I'm
yeah.
gonna tell you when we're done.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. It's definitely interesting, and I definitely think you should do some stuff in Spanish.
Yeah, so I wanted to say, like, with the Egyptian pyramids, right? Everybody questions, like, how the heck did Egyptian pyramids get there? But our pyramids, we all know how they got there, right? So
Yes.
it's like you can see the power of the Mexican culture, and imagine if you just gave them like the right tool now for the modern day 21st century.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too because those civilizations that are, again, I think Mexico has done a really good job of preserving indigenous culture. And looking back at Mesoamerican civilizations and, you know, the Aztecs or the Mayans and all of these incredible advancements that were made in, you know, in science and technology, astrology, and, you know, medicine, all of these things that these cultures were really known for. It's like, yeah, we're still these same people, and let's, you know, collaborate and build a community around, again, this innovation and hard work and Atlassian products, and um, you know, see how much we can advance in this. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I definitely think you gotta believe in your it's just I feel like it's hard to believe in yourself when again the bar doesn't you don't know where the bar is even at. Like you don't even know what's possible. And
Yeah.
and I think as a culture, like this is why I try to go back to my elementaries, my high schools, because again, 60% Hispanic culture here within
Mhm.
Southern California. Like
Mhm.
I feel like if you're ever gonna see a change in the world, you gotta go and inspire like the next generation, like the ones that are in kindergarten right now, to
Yeah.
know because I remember being in elementary and seeing like a 2020 something sign or something, which was like the year I was supposed to graduate from college, and
Mhm.
not knowing even what the word college meant back then, right? Like, and again, just
Yeah.
pure serendipity that my wife got through. Her three sisters, and my wife, all have degrees, but only because they were free. Like, I don't think like
Mhm.
education was important to them, but my father-in-law, like, selfishly, he wanted the girls to graduate and get to work with them, right? To
Mhm.
help them work the yards and their landscaping, the landscapers. So like get out there and
Mhm.
work. But the girls, like, I guess they stood up and they all went and got the degrees. Um, and yeah, so their life is significantly different, but it wasn't meant to be that way. Like I think all four of them kind of just band together and said, "No, we're not going to follow the status quo." Um,
Yes.
but yeah,
But again, I think that's, you know, there is always kind of this tug and pull within the culture, right? Like even between when we're talking about machismo and strong Mexican women, or when we're talking about being dreamers of, okay, I want something different for my life. I'm going to immigrate to a different country. I don't care if I need to start from the bottom. I'm going to do it and I'm going to achieve it. But then, too, these feelings of, oh, well, I don't know if I can make it. I don't know if I'm supposed to be here. I don't know exactly what I can achieve. I know I want to achieve something, but I don't know what's available to me. So it is kind of always this
but it's
tug
such
and
a thing
pull
that's
within the culture.
lost because so I'll give you two more stories because I know we're running out of time here.
Yeah.
Um, I started this YouTube channel in credit to my father-in-law because
Mm,
I was
mhm.
so scared, right? I had again, I have the masters. I have such a safety in my job and my career
Yeah.
that I was like, I wanted to go do my own thing, but I've been so scared. And so I sat down with my father-in-law one day. I'm like, what prompted you to leave Mexico, come here by yourself in like the hood of a car, cramped up in a car, risk your life, have
Yeah.
nothing, and then
Yes.
figure out how to get a job, and then figure out how to
Yeah.
get the rest of your family over, and then like feed them all, and then like put a house. Like, how did this like? Because I just have an uncertainty. You had like a million uncertainties, yet
Yes.
you figured it out. So I sat with him, and he kind of like walked me through his life story. And I'm like, I'm done. I'm just gonna make my YouTube channel then because I have zero excuse to not make my YouTube channel at that point,
Yes.
right? Because I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm not gonna struggle over just one uncertainty.
Right.
And so that was one story. And then the other story I wanted to tell you is like my right now I'm actively trying to move out of California. I would
Oh,
love to
okay.
I would love to move to another state that isn't as communist as California. Um,
Okay.
but my
Which state
nobody in
would
my
you like to
family,
move to? Do you
Texas,
know?
yeah,
Oh,
Texas,
okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
but
Lots of
but
Mexicans
no,
here. So,
yeah. Well, Austin, I have a lot of family presence in Austin. I don't know
oh,
that I'd be
yeah.
able to deal with Houston humidity, but um,
No, it's not that bad. I think people are
yeah,
dramatic.
I know maybe, but the idea. Well, the reason I'm telling you this, right, is like I'm at the point where if I were to move to Austin, right, like it'd be the stereotypical California, like I sell my $1 million home, I can go buy whatever I want in
Yes.
Texas, right? But I've
Yeah.
told every single one of my three sister-in-laws. I've told my
Mhm.
in-laws. I've told my parents because that's
Mhm.
really my inner circle. Let's just
Yes.
go. Let's go to Texas, and then everybody's like, "But what about our jobs? And what about our kids' schools? And what about this? What about that?" I'm like, our parents emigrated to this country with those same problems, yet they still did it. So like, why
Yes.
can't we do it? And it's like it's such a
Yes.
big blocker for them now. And it's so weird because like just one generation ago, it wasn't a blocker. And even for my
I
parents, like my mom
know.
won't do it. And I'm like, Mom, you came here with nothing. And
Mm.
I'm asking you, I'm gonna provide everything where we're going.
Yeah.
And it's still no. It's so
Yeah.
weird.
It's interesting. I think there potentially there could be a couple things that kind of go into that. I think like it is, there is a certain degree of adaptability that I think as immigrants or even children of immigrants, we have instilled of us of like, okay, something different is going on, but like we just gotta adapt and keep it going. And
Or
even like to a
comfort.
certain degree, when I moved to Mexico, it was almost like a reverse like immigration thing where I was like, I had grown up in a household where my dad would speak Spanish, and it was always instilled in me as a child that we were, to be very proud of our culture. And, you know, so even growing up with that background, it's different than going back and like actually living in Mexico. And so even me having some of those differences too of like, oh, okay, well, I need to get used to doing this differently or that differently, or I need to go to this different store for this or whatever, just even little cultural differences. Um, but you kind of just adapt. And it's not even really a conscious choice that you're making. You just kind of have to keep a forward momentum, and it just kind of happens. And I think maybe sometimes after feeling like, okay, I've worked hard, I've finally gotten accustomed to where I am, this new culture, this new setting, and then it's like, okay, please don't change
Don't
anything
change it.
else.
Don't change
I
it. It's
finally
perfect.
made it. I'm finally in my comfort zone. Please, like, I don't want to do this again. So maybe that's a little bit why, like, there's that resistance to change.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I just found it interesting and mind blowing because I'm like, you guys move for economic opportunity. I'm trying to create my 21st century, 2020 plus, right, version of economic opportunity. I lose
Yes.
13.3% of my check to California.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's like I'm tired. I want new
Yes.
economic opportunity, but I pay
Yes.
for a beautiful sunshine. I'm gonna
That's true. I guess, yeah, it definitely comes with its advantages. But
uh,
yeah, I
okay.
mean,
Well,
come to Texas. It's great.
no,
So,
I know. I plan on going. I'm going in November. I'll let you know. But we
okay,
are
nice.
out of
Yeah.
time. I want to thank you,
Okay.
Catherine.
Yeah, this has been a super meaningful conversation to me as well. I would be so happy if more people could get to hear a little bit
Yeah.
more
So
about.
yeah, it's going out.
Yeah,
Just okay.
awesome.
But
No, that
thank you. Yeah,
sounds good.
this conversation is very important because again, I'm in the same boat,
Yes.
right? I don't get to. There's not a. I don't interface with. I was just so surprised when you even said Mexican, right? Because I'm like, Mexico's not a word that I hear anywhere in my
Yeah.
day. Period.
I don't either. And it's interesting too because most of my colleagues are white, and just, American, but yeah, I have the one colleague who's Ecuadorian, but yeah, it is so great to make those connections within the professional space. It feels like, oh wow,
Yeah.
okay, like someone who gets it, you just feel like automatically you found someone who, okay, like
Yeah.
they
And it
understand what's going on.
explains the way we work because we do approach work and life differently
Yes,
than somebody
absolutely.
who has everything, right, versus not. So, I
Yes.
think it's a
Yeah.
good conversation for people to know, it's definitely going live, so,
Okay,
again,
awesome.
thank you very
Cool.
much, appreciate it, and, let me
Yeah,
hit
of
the
course.
stop.
Thank you.